O ye peoples of the earth, hearken unto my call. Enter ye, one and all, through this gate. The Bab, whose name in Persian means the gate, clearly and emphatically proclaimed that he was the promised one, and also the herald of one much greater than himself, referred to allegorically as he whom God shall make manifest. As the Bab had foreseen, other disciples, known as the 18 Letters of the Living, found the object of their search. Guided by dreams and visions, through prayer and fasting, they traveled from far and wide to enlist under the banner of the newborn faith. Among them was a young woman of bewitching charm and captivating eloquence, immortalized as Tahirih, the Pure One. The Bab entrusted each of his disciples with a mission. They scattered throughout the provinces of Persia, where they confronted the onslaught of the forces arrayed against them, raising a tumult that convulsed their country and reverberated as far as the capitals of Europe. The Bab directed Mullah Hussein to go to Tehran with a letter. He alluded in the most glowing terms to the as yet unrevealed mystery enshrined in that city. A mystery, he attested, that would transcend the light shed by both Islam and his own revelation. The mystery to which he alluded was a young man named Mirza Hussein Ali, later known by the title Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. He belonged to one of the most ancient and renowned families of Mazindaran. He was descended on the one hand from Abraham through his wife Keturah, and on the other from Zoroaster, the prophet of Persia. Crowning his illustrious lineage, he was also a descendant of Jesse, the father of the legendary King David. Mirza Hussein Ali, upon receiving the Bab's message from Mullah Hussein, immediately acknowledged the claim of the Bab and became one of his most devoted followers. The Bab's fame spread rapidly, and many people from all walks of life were recruited to the swelling army of his faith. He proceeded to Isfahan in September 1846, and after a brief period of tranquility, the inevitable clash of his revelation with the entrenched orthodoxy led ultimately to his incarceration in the fortress of Maku. Imprisoned on a remote mountain in Azerbaijan, on the frontiers of the Ottoman and Russian empires, the prisoner of Maku seemed utterly helpless. But the Bab was not so easily subdued. Anyone coming into contact with him was totally captivated and disarmed by his person. Even Ali Khan, the warden of the fortress, under the influence of a strange vision, felt such shame at his treatment of the prisoner that he relaxed the severity of his discipline and permitted a stream of devoted pilgrims to visit the Bab. The authorities soon learned of this turn of events and had the Bab transferred to the fortress of Shirik, but to no avail. Distinguished Sayyids, Ulamas, and even government officials from the region were boldly and rapidly espousing his cause. Again, accounts of these startling conversions were communicated to Tehran, forcing the Grand Vizier, chief minister of the Shah, to intervene. He issued an historical order for the immediate convocation of the ecclesiastical dignitaries of Tabriz and the surrounding province. The avowed purpose of that gathering was to arraign the prisoner and deliberate on the steps to be taken for the extermination of his so-called heresy. Instead, it afforded the Bab the opportunity to assert in public, formally, and without any reservation, the claims inherent in his revelation. In the presence of the highest authorities of the region, the Bab gave his celebrated answer to the question put to him about his claim. I am the promised one. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked, at whose mention you have risen, whose advent you have longed to witness, and the hour of whose revelation you have prayed God to hasten. Verily I say, it is incumbent upon the peoples of both the East and the West to acknowledge me and to obey my word. These words could hardly be misconstrued. To the ecclesiastical hierarchy, they were anathema. In spite of his incarceration, the last 3 years of the Bab's ministry witnessed an unprecedented outpouring of inspired writings, expounding the revolutionary principles of his new religion, and emphatically proclaiming his twofold mission as the bearer of a wholly independent revelation and the herald of one still greater than his own. So it was, during the early days of the Bab's incarceration, that the independence of the newborn faith was publicly proclaimed in Tabriz. The laws underlying the new dispensation had been revealed by its author in a prison fortress in the mountains of Azerbaijan, and would soon be tested at an assemblage of his followers at Badasht, on the plains of Mazinderan. During the Bab's incarceration, Mirza Hussein Ali, to whom the Bab had referred as the Mystery of Tehran, directed the activities of the Bab's struggling disciples. He effectively, but unobtrusively, guided the organization of an historic meeting of the followers of the Bab at Badasht and presided over its deliberations. The primary purpose of that gathering was to demonstrate the independence of the Bab's religion by a sudden, a complete and dramatic break with Islam, with its social order, its ecclesiasticism, its traditions and ceremonials. In the hamlet of Badasht, Mirza Hussein Ali rented 3 gardens. 81 disciples who had gathered from various provinces were his guests. On every one, he conferred a new title, and for each, the Bab subsequently revealed a special tablet, addressing each of the disciples by their new name. Mirza Hussein Ali was from this time on addressed by the title Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. On the most memorable day of that conference, Tahirih, the only female disciple of the Bab, suddenly appeared unveiled before the assembled companions in deliberate contravention of tradition, and boldly proclaimed the inauguration of a new dispensation. The effect was electric and instantaneous. She appeared for a moment in the eyes of her scandalized beholders to have defamed herself and to have shamed the faith she had espoused. Anger and bewilderment swept through the assembly. A few immediately renounced their faith, while others stood mute, transfixed before her. Just a little over 4 years had elapsed since the birth of the Bab's revelation, when the trumpet blast, mentioned in the Quran, was sounded, announcing the formal extinction of the old and the inauguration of the new dispensation. The Conference of Badasht had achieved its aim. The break from the past was dramatic and unmistakable. Tahirih's removal of her veil at the Conference of Badasht dramatically symbolized a revolutionary break with the traditions of the past. In mid-19th century Persia, traditional Shia society viewed the role of women as distinctly subordinate. Women were regarded as unworthy of any substantial education and were absolutely barred from positions of authority. They could not act independently of men, and in public gatherings they were segregated. In June 1848, in the midst of such a repressive society, women's equality with men was boldly and dramatically proclaimed in accordance with the precepts of the Bab's new dispensation. Interestingly, it was in July 1848 that the first Women's Rights Convention in the United States was held at Seneca Falls, New York. A powerful new spirit was alive in the world. The momentous happenings associated with the Bab's incarceration in Maku and Sherik, his interrogation in Tabriz, and the break with Islamic tradition symbolized by the events of Badasht, inflamed both the fervor of his supporters and the fury of his enemies. A persecution more terrible than any yet perpetrated upon the nascent community was soon unleashed, accompanied by corresponding acts of heroism. This period of ceaseless and unprecedented upheaval robbed that faith in quick succession of its chief protagonists, including the heroic Tahirih, attained its climax in the execution of its author, followed by an almost complete elimination of its eminent supporters, with the sole exception of one, Baha'u'llah, who at its darkest hour was entrusted through the dispensations of Providence with the dual function of saving a sorely stricken faith from annihilation and of ushering in the dispensation destined to supersede it. Eyewitness accounts of the terrible persecution and unbelievable heroism which took place in the regions of Mazinderan, Neriz, and elsewhere serve as a perpetual chronicle both of the perversity of the enemies of the faith and the inexplicable dignity and loftiness of the Babi martyrs in the face of the unspeakable torture to which they were subjected. These events of heroism and persecution are fully documented for all the world to peruse, so we will not dwell upon them here. But one of these incredible stories must be told. The Bab's isolation and captivity had not produced the intended result, so a more dramatic remedy was needed. Acting independently of his counselors and fellow ministers, the Grand Vizier of Nasiruddin Shah ordered the governor of Azerbaijan to execute the Bab. The indignant governor refused to perform what he regarded as an illegal act, so the Grand Vizier commissioned his own brother to carry out his orders. The Bab was taken to a military barracks in Tabriz to await his execution. In the midst of his last confidential conversation with his secretary, an official abruptly interrupted them to take the secretary away. The Bab turned to the functionary and exclaimed, "Not until I have said to him all those things that I wish to say can any earthly power silence me. Though all the world be armed against me, yet shall it be powerless to deter me from fulfilling to the last word my intention." The next day, a large crowd gathered around the barracks square to witness the execution. A regiment of Christian Armenian rifles, led by Colonel Sam Khan, was ordered to carry it out. The colonel, who was sympathetic with his captive, explained to the Bab at the first opportunity that he was a Christian, entertained no ill will against him, and asked to be freed of the obligation to shed his blood. The Bab told him to follow his instructions, and if his intentions were sincere, the Almighty would relieve him of his perplexity. With this assurance, Sam Khan proceeded to discharge his duty. A spike was driven into a pillar of the barracks facing the square. A rope was fastened to it, from which the Bab and a devoted follower were to be suspended. The youthful and devout Muhammad Ali, surnamed Anis, had on the previous day flung himself at the Bab's feet as he was escorted into the barracks courtyard and pleaded not to be sent away from him. Lifting the youth up, the Bab said to him, "Muhammad Ali, rest assured that you will be with me. Tomorrow you shall witness what God has decreed." When the two were bound, the firing squad ranged itself in 3 files. The command was given, and 3 volleys were fired. The smoke from the rifles was so dense that it completely obscured the view. When the smoke finally cleared, the astounded multitude of nearly 10,000 Anwars, who had crowded onto the roof of the barracks and surrounding houses, beheld a scene their eyes could not believe. The Bab had vanished. Only Anis stood at the foot of the wall, alive and unscathed. The ropes that bound them had been severed by the bullets. A frenzied search ensued, and the Bab was found in the room he had occupied the night before, completing his previously interrupted conversation with his secretary. The Bab turned to the incredulous official and quietly declared, "I have finished my conversation. Now you may proceed to fulfill your intention." Recalling the bold assertion his prisoner had previously made, and shaken by what he had just witnessed, the official left immediately and resigned his post. Colonel Sam Khan, likewise remembering the reassuring words addressed to him by the Bab, swore never again, even at the cost of his own life, to repeat that act. Another officer volunteered to replace him, and the Bab and his companion were again suspended in the same manner. The new regiment formed in line and fired. The Bab and his devoted companion were riddled with bullets. According to an eyewitness, their bodies were severely mutilated, but their faces were untouched, and the arms of Anis appeared to hold the Bab in an embrace. The Bab's earthly life thus ended on July 9th, 1850, at the age of 30. That evening, the mangled bodies were taken from the courtyard of the barracks and thrown at the edge of a moat outside the city gate. Sentinels were ordered to keep watch over them. The next night, however, on instructions from Baha'u'llah, a follower of the Bab succeeded in removing the bodies to a hiding place. Under the mysterious protection of Baha'u'llah, the Bab's remains were moved from one hiding place to another over a period of 60 years. They were finally secreted to the Holy Land, and on March 21st, 1909, were permanently and ceremoniously laid to rest by Abdu'l-Baha, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, in a specially erected mausoleum on the slopes of Mount Carmel.